It's January 20th, 1994, and we're interviewing Barry Olivier in Berkeley, California. I've already put a signature on this, so I can sit this right there. It's already keyed up for who we are. We were interested, really, in talking to you about your perceptions that I picked up from the reading we've done about, I'll call it the need to change the festival to adapt to new streams that we're coming into the folk world. I was somewhat impressed with what looked to be your willingness to incorporate elements of rock and into the festival. And
I got there. It took me a while, but
well, if you could talk a little bit about what were you listening to when you were a kid in the 50s and started out. You had talked about getting.
Yes, I started off very puristically inclined, and what I listened to was pretty purist. I mean, the first recordings I heard and hated, by the way, were field recordings. My dad brought home some Library of Congress recordings in it. I mean, I didn't hate them, but I wasn't. None of them leaped out and grabbed me. I wasn't sitting on learning stuff from field recordings, but I heard them. They were among the first. And then Burl Ives, Josh White, Pete Seeger, Woody Guthrie, and those kinds of people. And I love just the drama of the solo singer, with a ballad song, and started singing myself in the mid-40s, and listening to others, and then stayed. As we began the festivals, we had a couple of small festivals in '56 and '7, and then had a first big one in '58. And we were trying to. I was not enamored of the Kingston Trio and the early folk pop people. I mean, I actually liked a lot of the songs and stuff that they really sang, but I thought, well, this is a whole different thing. This isn't what we're doing. We're doing something that's the real stuff.
Was the Weavers anything that interested you?
Yes, I love the Weavers. No, I love the Weavers.
Interesting. Weavers, how do you differentiate them from the other folk pop groups of the mid to late 50s?
They didn't wink as much.
Okay, I understand.
They were more. Their impurity was that they were political, and that was okay with me. I mean, I wasn't political. I've never been political. I'm not political. I like the Clintons. There's my badge. No, right here. But you know what? Turn this thing on. That won't work. I wonder why I wasn't making any noise. But the Kingston Trio and all those guys were a little too cute. They winked a little too much. It was jokey. The Weavers were not like that. And I saw them in the early days in the concert, and they came out and just sang great songs, and they had some jokes. I mean, no performer does not. But I saw them as quite different. Although at the time we started the festival, we got Pete very early in '59. We wanted him in '58, but it didn't work out. So he came in '59, and he came several more festivals through the years. And it was really through Pete that I sort of started shifting gears about what I wanted to think of as folk music. I at first thought folk music just had to be anonymous and old, and things that were clearly traditional material. And I wasn't wild about Woody Guthrie. I'm not wild about Woody Guthrie to this moment. Woody Guthrie did some darn good stuff, and he was a wonderful symbol for songwriters to be lifted from. But I started hearing Pete sing songs of Tom Paxton and others, and Dylan. Dylan's another one I first heard. I got a letter in '62 from Robert Shelton of the New York Times, who I was in touch with. He wrote me about Dylan, how he said somebody you really might want to listen to, and then I bought his album and took it back. It was terrible.
That
Hated
was the very first album?
I hated the first album. I didn't hear any of the potential that a lot of other people had heard. And then a couple of years later, I thought it was fabulous, but by then it was too late to catch that rising star and have him in a festival. We'd made some attempts. But anyway, Pete in the '63 festival, like that's a picture of him singing at the Greek Theater right there with his arm out like that. I can't use real pictures over there because they fade mercilessly. That's Pete and his dad at the 70 festival. Annie Woods took that shot. Had a print for the introduction, which I've never seen in place. Anyway, Pete came and sang in '63, you know, Ramblin' Boy and some of Tom's songs, and I sort of had to re-examine, you know, what I thought was where this stuff all fell, and in the course of a few years, I just sort of I didn't do. I never took any drugs. I didn't just get drugged out and say, "Hey, man, this is fabulous." But I just liked the music and just started seeing that it was a continuation of this music. And I call it folk music. I call it folk music now. So it just kind of opened up there and you know, put the umbrella over more things.
You said you talked about who you were interested in initially. You mentioned Josh White, Burl Ives. A lot of folks would not consider that really pure. They would,
of course,
they would look at them as
right.
Simply, and Pete himself. When people would look at him as just
yes,
an interpreter.
That's
of,
right. Pure interpreter. Well, I always look at these people as people who had a touch with the real tradition. Now, Nick Reynolds and John, the other guys are the guys in
Chicago.
No, this is Nick Reynolds is the short guy in the Kingston Trio. The Kingston Trio guys, even the Limelighter guys. I mean, I knew Glenn Yarbrough from when he was a folk singer, and we taught each other songs and stuff like that. These guys had no touch with tradition. They were strictly in touch with it. They were strictly scanning through electronic media what was out there. Now, Burl Ives grew up in Illinois, and or somewhere in the Midwest. I read his autobiography years ago. And he really, his grandfather sang, his aunt sang, his mother sang. He learned the stuff initially that way, and then he learned a lot of songs when Decca Records hired Beth Lomax to teach him songs. I mean, she sat around and taught him songs all the time. But he had a real touch with tradition, and Pete had this touch with tradition, and so I saw that as a differentiation from the others. But it's right. I would call those guys. I call them purists at the time, but they were from the standpoint of they were not just taking anything. They were not singing "They Call the Wind Mariah" from "Paint Your Wagon" or whatever it was from, and you know, and just mixing anything at all in. Now I see no harm in playing anything you want. You play the Star Spangled Banner or "O Solo Mio" or whatever you want, and it's fine. But at that time, I thought there should be some walls. And within the walls should be good stuff, and without the walls should be the unclean, the unwashed. Oh no, the washed, not the unwashed.
When you first started presenting the concerts in the mid-'50s, that I guess bled into the first official festival, were you kind of a lone wolf out there? Did you have a whole lot of? Did you have a big crowd around you, understanding what you were doing and wanting to participate in just what your vision was?
Well, vision, big word. It was
the tripped up George Bush.
What?
Tripped up George Bush.
Yeah, right. I would just say that many of us had a lot of enthusiasm for the music. I had a lot of enthusiasm for the music, and I had some organizing background. I mean, when I was in the 9th grade in Berkeley schools, I was organizing the campaign for president by a student friend of mine. He won on a landslide, and that kind of thing. And I started organizing things, and I'd been business-minded in a sense, entrepreneurial since I was 11, buying and selling used books and guitars and things in the junk shops. And so I had this sort of like this little bit of power that nobody else I knew in the mix, the Filky pipes had. So I started thinking, gosh, Pete Seeger comes to town and he sings to a few hundred people in the auditorium. It's ridiculous. This guy is fabulous. We got to be able to get out more people. So then I started trying to organize. I didn't actually present Pete in any concerts except for festivals, but I started organizing some small concerts. And then I started going to university and saying, look, I've been organizing these concerts. I'd like to see something in Wheeler Hall where I'd seen them. I'd seen concerts in Wheeler Hall, Carl Sandburg in 1948, and Sam Hinton in 48, and John Jacob Niles in 49, and various people that they had come through there. And I said, well, here's some people I think I'll present, and they seemed agreeable to after I'd done a couple of free concerts that I organized for them, to having me cook up some more. So there were some solo concerts. There was this Houston came up and did a concert, and Gene Ritchie and various people, and then we launched the festivals, and that's how it started.
Was there a large crowd? Did you have in '56? Did you have a?
Well, let me tell you that there were large crowds and tiny crowds, and it was a crapshoot just like it is today to some degree, unless you had Madonna or something. You didn't have Madonna. But I remember in '56 we did the first festival type concert, which I sang in, and along with some of the best singers that I thought were the best singers around the area, in a 500-seat hall on the campus, 155 Grinnell Hall, and it was free, and it was jammed. The place was jammed, and it was even reviewed and possibly reviewed, and it was everybody thought it was super. And then we did another one in '57, and meanwhile, I guess it was around the time of the second one, '57, that we started doing some regular Friday night jam sessions at a place called Northgate Restaurant, which is on the west side of campus. And it was a kind of a student hangout, and they had salsa dancing there some nights, and I went in and talked to the guy who ran it, and we kind of got along, and he said, sure, I want to do some things. So Friday nights we started doing folks on jam sessions, and that ran for a lot of the year. I ran from mid-57, I guess, to the early '58, weekly, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people who came to that. And the first it was free, and then it was 2 bits donation, which covered a newsletter, which we put out and stuff like that.
What type of were you playing to yourselves, or did you bring in performers?
Oh, we opened it up to performers, but it was invitational. It wasn't just like anybody could walk in and play. It was not open mic, but I knew a lot of the performers. I just run into around town at the just a lot of meetings and the guitar store or whatever, and so we talked to people, and they came and sang, and then other people come and say, well, I got this friend who's real good, and they say, okay, well, let's have him sing a few songs, and but then they weren't there. Once in a while, somebody would be passing through. Bob Gibson came through and played there. Billy Fair came over from San Francisco with me in town and played, and he was sort of a name. I mean, sort of all relative.
Sure.
No huge, no huge names. And it was that's what it was.
Were you listening to the radio also, or totally unaware? Or
Well, I'll tell you, I was listening.
Popular musical culture.
I totally missed the whole startup of rock and roll. I saw this funny guy, Elvis Presley, on the cover of a few albums, and I thought, weird. It's weird. And I've gotten familiar with it now that I'm teaching. I've gotten familiar with a lot of that material because people don't play it, and I've listened to it and liked it. And so I have but my wife was always making fun of me because she was listening to Elvis while I was listening to Pete. And but I listened to the radio. I mean, but not to folk music programs and stuff. In the late '40s, I there's some great stuff on Doug Pledger's Polka Hour, Polka Party on an FM station, and we used to get that. I think it must have been an AM station. It wasn't much FM. It was like what you have now on an FM station. And but I didn't listen to much of the pop stuff.
So you talked about being involved with Folk Music Club and having these things. Was there a sense at all, a self-conscious sense? And I say this keeping in mind that you were very young then, and people who are young like to think that they're going against the grain or something. Is there a sense that you were sort of into something that others were not into, and it was somehow special because of that, or not at
No,
all?
I would say not. There weren't. I mean, there was a folk. There were various folk booms.
Yeah.
Burl Ives. There was a hell of a folk boom in '47, '8, '9. Burl Ives. I went to the San Francisco Opera House to hear Burl Ives in '48, and it was full. And he sang 13 encores. Every encore earned. There was none of this run back on the stage stuff. And afterwards, I went back to the stage because I met him the day before at a record signing party where I got off of school legitimately and spent the afternoon pestering him. He was very nice. But I mean, I spent the afternoon when there wasn't anybody around. At least I was somebody to talk to. So I talked to him. I went over the next night. So I saw him backstage, and he was just. I mean, he was great. He was a monster. He was a huge guy, and he was just pouring sweat. And he'd done this great concert. And it was a phenomenal concert. And I've never seen anybody get anything like even half that many encores before, or since, I should say. And so there was that boom, and then there was the Weavers boom of the 1950 with On Top of Old Smoky and all that stuff, which I remember singing all summer with that summer, and I didn't hire and sing. And then there was a revival of the Weavers boom in the mid-50s. So there were these little boomlets happening, and then the early 60s, or 63, 4, kind of peaked, I guess, got to be the greatest of what they call the folk scares. I'm sure you've heard the folk scare, Utah Phillips calls it. So I felt like it wasn't, in Berkeley, Berkeley goes way back in folk music. I mean, Pete Seeger's dad, Charles, in that picture here, he organized a concert in 1913 at Faculty Glade. He didn't sing in it, although he sang and played. I was privileged to hear him do that one time. But he was a classical musician. He was a professor of music, full professor of music at the age of 26 in 1912 at Berkeley, the youngest professor in the history of the University of California, and I'm sure will always be, unless some incredible genius comes along. Anyway, he cooked up this concert, a folk music concert, which was with people, sort of art-trained singers singing folk songs and with a piano accompaniment. But that's 1913, and Carl Sandburg sang at Berkeley to 5,000 people in the Portuguese book, published in 27. So, and he was reading poetry and singing folk songs. So there's a lot of history of Berkeley of folky stuff. So I felt like it felt right at home to be, singing folk songs, which I did myself from about 47 on, and presenting them and having get-togethers with singers.
You've mentioned that you weren't terribly political and have never been, and Pete Seeger certainly is, and in the public mind, folk music and politics are casually linked in a great many people's minds.
Sure, of course.
And at least in the East Coast, and I don't know so much about here, but at least in the East Coast, a lot of the young kids who were brought up on folk music were the kids of communists or friends of communists.
Right.
Did that politics infuse the circles within which you traveled as a youngster in the 50s?
There were definitely politics. There were politics around and laced in with the music, but it was. I think that the music was already getting away from it. In other words, the guys who liked the music and happened to like the leftist politics, they sat down and thought, well, gee, why can we let one hand help the other? We'll just let this thing be worked together, and that was a very good strategy. I'm happy they did it. But after a while, then the music gets to the point where people who aren't political like it and use it their own way. And I wasn't anti-political, but I just wasn't involved. But I do remember, going to a Pete Seeger concert about a mile from here at the John Muir School Auditorium in about 51, I guess. And the next day, the Oakland Tribune reviewed it and said it was a communist meeting. It was nothing but a communist meeting. Bullshit. Most of the time, I didn't hear any communist propaganda at all. It was just songs, But
how are things influenced?
Well, with the blacklist, the blacklist of the Weavers, did that touch upon your activities at all?
The thing is, not really. I mean, the McCarthy era was ridiculed in Berkeley probably quicker than it was other places. And I was not aware. I mean, I was here. I was in high school and just starting college. I was not really aware of what was happening, so I can't really comment on it. Except that I guess I became aware while I was at Cal, and I do remember when finally the dam broke, and I walked through Sacred Gate one day, and a guy was selling red buttons that said McCarthy for Fuhrer, and I bought a couple to each or whatever it was. The next day, I mean, they swept the campus. The next day, you could get $5 each for these, and everybody wanted one. I mean, everybody was laughing their ass off at McCarthy because he had gotten to the point, and this must have been 1954, where he was just funny and he was ludicrous. And if you just start seeing him as funny, then he was done for, and he in fact was done for. So that, of course, but the blacklist was in place, and it didn't, go out the day that McCarthy started being laughed at. So he kept going.
Did you, I guess, beat Newport to the punch with something called a festival by about a year or even more?
I guess a year. The thing is that the first festival we ran, and the first big one we ran, which was multi-events. It had workshops and concerts and a campfire sing, an opening free concert in the faculty building, all that stuff. That the university would not allow us to call it in the title festival. They said, a festival is something that's we just decided how to define the word festival. So they called it a weekend of folk music. It was 4 days. It was like 30 events or something like that. It was a festival.
Right.
But anyway, and we called it that in the press releases, but we were not allowed to call it that on the poster. And so it wasn't until '59, which was the year Newport started, I guess, that I think they followed us. I think we were June 20th or July or something, whatever. That the word we used the word festival, but I guess we beat them out of it.
What were your models?
Didn't have one.
Really?
Yeah. It just seemed. I'll tell you what inspired me. I'd grown up in Berkeley, as I'd born in the city, moved around the Bay Area. As my dad was the school principal, and moved to bigger, more challenging jobs, and as he went on in his career. But I first lived in Berkeley in '44 for the summer, and then I moved to Berkeley in '47 as a kid, a little older. And so I've been around the campus a lot, and I've always been just dazzled by the Berkeley campus, and just its beauty, its location. I don't know, just the physical presence of the place is just to me very inspiring, and that's really what inspired the idea of the festival. And I thought, if we could have right away I thought, we could have in Faculty Glade we could have an opening free concert with each singer singing a couple of songs or something like that, so people could come and just see what was happening at the beginning of the thing. And then there were concert halls. They just opened Hertz Hall, and there were other places on the campus where concerts could be held. And we had some concerts here, and we could have workshops in other rooms, and closing. We had our closing barbecue campfire sing, which was it's the kind of thing you couldn't have thousands of people at. So we had that reserved that for those who bought tickets to the whole thing, and that was included in the deal for the whole thing. So there were like 200 people, of the thousands who'd come, who had tickets to the whole thing, and they came to this closing barbecue and campfire sing. And that was down in the Faculty Glade, which still exists, but they had a fire pit down there which no longer exists. And it was just like a cathedral that people looked at trees. So that's what really that was. There wasn't a model though. I hadn't been to any. There hadn't been any festivals. So I hadn't. So it kind of came from that.
What was it about the songs that Pete brought to your attention in '63 that struck you? I mean, they seem to have really made hit a chord in you.
Yeah.
Recall it even 30 years down the line.
Yeah, I tell you what, I had resisted the political songs. What we used to call topical songs. In fact, everybody called them topical songs. It means, you're pissed off. Malvina Reynolds wakes up one morning pissed off at the latest government squelching of something, and she writes a pissed off song. And sometimes she writes a good pissed off song, and it catches on and people sing it. And I'd always found those, well, I wasn't, there were a few very, very beautiful Melody Smith songs that I really loved, but I resisted quite easily most of them.
Yeah.
She had actually, felt she should be included in the festivals right from the start. We actually did have her in the festival, but not till 1970, not for a long time. But the topical songs and the sort of union songs, all that stuff, those were, I saw them as perfectly legitimate, but just not part of what I was drawn to and what I thought was the central fire of this whole music. But Pete, when he sang some of these other ones, it just felt like those were in the central fire. They were burning right out of the middle, and they weren't. It wasn't. Rambling Boy is a song of universal, with a universal message, not like I'm pissed off because I hate what stupid old Ike did on Sunday, or damn those Chevron stations for strike breaking, or all that kind of stuff that seems so momentary.
Well, very much songs from the headlines.
Songs from the headlines, exactly, right. So I guess it was a sort of universality, and also I just changed. I was so tight ass. I finally went, oh wait a minute, why am I excluding all this stuff? And then, and I talked to people, and people would say, God, there's all these great things happening, and I started opening my eyes to those things.
What's the central fire you talk about? Have you thought about that? You use the term.
I've never used the term before today, so I have no idea what it is. Just your question brought it out, and I think it's a good question, and I like what is that? What was it that I saw there? And I think that's it. Just felt like it was on the great path of I think back of the first guy sitting by a campfire or shivering under a tree or something with his compatriots or his little camp or something, and telling a story or singing a little song, and just I see that as the birth of all drama, way before they had plays. Different people learned parts and stuff. There were the epic singers, but probably way before those guys, probably 25, 30,000 years before those guys, there was somebody sitting around singing, a bird shit on my head today, or something like that, and everybody laughed or whatever. I see that sort of path of the singer-songwriter.
Well, to digress, to pass something on to you, Tom Paxton said to he told us that he also first listened to Burl Ives. You remember that? And that's when he started listening to it. And I asked him what he liked about the music, and he said, in opposition to so much of the other stuff that was popular, I don't know, these songs struck in me a chord that people mattered. People are not to be fucked with. People are just important commodities. And unfortunately, he said it on audio tape, and he didn't repeat it when we were filming it. It was just greatly delivered, and I couldn't prompt him with enough spontaneity to do it again. But he did. It was a good expression of one person's
Very good.
sense
I
of
like that. That's good. Yeah, there's that central human experience thing. It's like looking through the pictures in the Family of Man, the photographic thing. That's different about than just looking at somebody's pictures of Paris or something like that.
So, did you get a lot of resistance to changing the shape of the festival, or maybe changing the shape?
Well, I
of
was
the
lucky
festival too
because
much, or was you the festival?
I did whatever the hell I wanted. I mean, I shouldn't say. I didn't do that. I couldn't have brought in belly dancers and burlesque dancers or vaudeville acts or something like that. I mean, I did have to. Initially, I worked with the committee, which is now called the Committee for Arts. Well, it's now called, what's it called? Committee for Arts and Lectures, CAL, Productions, Cal Productions, yeah. And it was called other things over the years, but it doesn't matter. It was comprised of professors and a few students and some staff people. And so I would say, these are the artists I think would be good to try to get, and a lot of them people who they had previously, so they was not a problem. And then once I did a few events, and and it went over well. Not only went over well, but the professors thought it was good. They thought it was very well run, and they thought it was well selected. I mean, it was sort of like no problemo. I could say there's this great singer in Topeka, Kansas, I think we ought to get, and they'd say, well, get him.
Well, they began to simply trust your judgment based
Yeah.
on what they've seen.
Yeah, right. So,
I was wondering, the crowds, I mean, what were there? Did it get more crowded in 63, 64? Were people asking to see more of these topical songs?
that's a good question. I think that there were so many factors. I mean, one of the daunting things about putting on festivals, and one of the reasons I wouldn't dream doing it anymore, unless somebody just handed me $1 million and said, "Well, take half that for you and half that to organize a festival." Is that there's so many factors. I mean, in '67, we had a tremendous festival lined up, but then the Monterey Pop Festival was cooked up in 6 weeks' time, and it was 3 weeks before us. And that was it didn't completely shoot us down, but it probably made a difference of, between breaking even and losing our ass, someone losing our ass. And then there were people there, and we had a good festival, but it bit into what was happening, So you just never know. I mean, rain or disasters. We had some festivals where there was fighting in the streets 2 weeks before, tear gassing masses of people on the campus and stuff. And we never got tear gassed right out of existence, but we had a couple of years where it was real close, where we could have just been closed down. And, she could have said, "Sorry, kids, send those people home. We're not doing this." So, but there was those kind of fluctuations. It doesn't feel to me. I think we led the audience. I don't think they led us. But if I thought about it more, I probably would think of sometimes when the audience indicated something to us. And I know that, for example, in '64 we had a kind of a nicely grounded thing. We had a terrific festival. The Ramblers were out, Pete was out. Was Pete out in '64? He couldn't have been out in '64. It was the Ramblers, Doc Watson, Joan Baez, that Joan was there. Alice Stewart, who was still kind of like very sort of little known, really, nationally, but was a fabulous singer, still is. And a bunch of people, I think. But we had could have been Robert Pete Williams, I'm not sure, somebody out from Mississippi, a blues guy. But we had some, maybe Tom came out. I think Tom came out in '64. Tom Paxton, he was there. And so we had a nice mix. In '65, for whatever reason, and I couldn't tell you what it was, but we ended up with a much more traditional style festival. And it wasn't, and there was no rock until really rock until '66. '65 was a little too traditional. There may have been somebody in there who was not, but it did not do nearly as well. In fact, I remember Ralph Leeson, who was the major critic in this area for 20 years, died. Ralph saying to me, "Olivier, you've got a nice, safe festival there." I was very much influenced. I've always sought a lot of input. I mean, and people find out that they can kick the shit out of me, and I like it because I can grow from it. I mean, they can say, "That was the shits. How could you have possibly invited Joe Blow? What a bunch of crap," etc. And once they find out that I can take it, then they're willing to give it, and I got a lot of good advice. Ralph's advice was very good. So that was '65. So '66, we had the Jefferson Airplane, and we had President Joan Fish, and a bunch of other people. So we started really branching out into rock stuff then.
I see that as a real sea change, a greater change than the change you might have made in '63.
True,
when the audience
that's true.
Did
Right.
that provoke any type of controversy, or was it
No.
still pretty much? I think it was just.
I think it provoked a lot of enthusiasm. And the year after that, we had 6 different rock and roll bands, including one that's so avant-garde that they're sort of like the most avant-garde.
Well, that must have been Red Crayola.
Red Crayola, yes, Somebody called me, was making a movie or something about them, and they were trying to get information. I forget what I had. I had a review or something. But Red Crayola. I wasn't even going to remember their name. But
What happened to Red Crayola? Do you have any idea?
I don't know, but one of them became prominent in some other thing. I forget, movies or something. I don't know what it was. But we had a lot of different rock bands, including Kaleidoscope. That's David Lindley's group from Colorado, with Song in the Feldhouse. He's still playing on the Mountain Coast by himself. I mean, that was a fabulous band. They did some really great folk music in rock format.
Well, by '66 then, when you were putting on a mixture of older traditional folk shows and rock shows, were you even thinking in terms of, is this or is this not folk music, or were you just putting on innovative music that you liked about other people?
Yes, I still was thinking, I was still thinking in terms of folk music and its natural outgrowths. I mean, I wasn't about to sort of bring in a Bach choir or something like that. I mean, I love that stuff. I sung in Bach choirs. I love choral music. I love a lot of different kinds of music, especially Bach, as a matter of fact. But, so nothing against old JS, but you know, it was stuff that I like. The Jefferson Airplane in '64. I sang in a benefit concert in I think it was Stevens Park in San Jose that Alice Stewart was in, and I think maybe it was Alice and I was in it. Anyway, I sang this thing, and Paul Kantner and Jerry Kalkinen, who was later Jorma Kalkinen, they were in that concert as solo acts. And I really liked them, and we talked afterwards and stuff. So then when the Airplane sprang up, then I realized these guys that I knew, so so I listened to the Airplane, and I felt like there was a real connection there, and we talked to them, etc. But no, there wasn't. Gosh, you know, I know that at Newport there is the legend, at least, of a tremendous opposition to Dylan coming on stage. But I mean, of course, that was very special because he was like the young prince who was going to lead us all out of the wilderness or something like that. Suddenly, the young prince is cavorting with the others, and I don't know. That was a different. We might have had the same problem. I don't think we would have had the same problem. I think people here are so goddamn open that you know. I've been to the East once in my life. Last year I went to New York and Boston. I loved it, but that's my knowledge of the East. I know nothing, so I shouldn't contrast it. But I don't think anything here would have caused much of a fuss.
Since you were doing this since the early '50s or even earlier in terms of your own listening, paying attention to folk music, being involved in folk music groups, did the commercial hoopla of '63, '64 ever catch you going, what the hell is going on? And an analogy is, a couple of years ago, Ken Burns' documentary on the Civil War was shown on TV, and everybody loved it, and there was this big hoopla. And there's been guys who've been Civil War buffs, for decades, and they recreate battles every year, and they have their own magazines, and there's always been 20 of them. And suddenly everybody was interested in the Civil War, and there were coffee table books, and I read some articles about these guys, and they're all saying, give us back our Civil War.
Oh, I see.
So did that ever hit you a little bit when everybody and his brother was for a folk
I'm not
group?
sure. I with the sort of shindigs and all this.
The Hootenanny TV show is a good example.
All that stuff. I paid very little attention to it myself. I actually always thought it always felt warming to me that these things were happening in popular culture, because it felt like that would bring more people into the camp where they will hear some of the stuff, and maybe some of them will end up wanting to hear the real stuff or the better people. And so I think it was more like that for me, but I don't know. It's such a long time ago. I could have forgotten. They may have been glossing over my irate reaction to it. I don't think so.
Did Peter, Paul, and Mary have an impact on you at all?
Yes, I like what they did. In fact, I was working for a few years. Mostly I've always been on my own hook, teaching and running festivals. I also ran Joan Baez's concerts for 12 years. For her manager, did all of the concerts for 300 miles during that time. And when I worked at Cal, we got a call from Peter, Paul, and Mary's manager. They were just playing at the Hungry Eye. And they said, look, we got these people, we want them to get some exposure. Well, we'd like them to come over and do a free concert somewhere on the campus. So we put them in the Bears Lair, which we regularly had cabaret things in the basement of the student union. And they did an afternoon concert, which I oversaw, but really didn't get a chance to hear. I heard a little bit of it. But they had a huge turnout, very enthusiastic. But I liked what they did. It still felt a little too slick. And And the last thing I saw of theirs was their most recent video of Peter Paul Mommy 2. And they have some great songs in that. But I mean, when I practically threw up with Paul Stuckey's whole thing about an old womanless wall of fly. I mean, that's so. It's worse than vaudeville. It's worse than anything. It's god awful. So the seeds of that were there, you know. Along with some very beautiful stuff. They did a lot of beautiful stuff. They had some beautiful arrangements. They picked some terrific songs. You know, and we brought them to people's attention.
Did the festivals ever become, even momentarily during a given festival, heavily politicized events with all that was going on in the country or Berkeley, and some of the acts, Phil Oakes with Vietnam in Berkeley, but it never.
It never became politicized. I mean, I wasn't trying to stop it. I honestly didn't. It's fine. Phil got up and sang, you know, and said, "Let's go have a peace march" or something. I mean, they could have done that. I never told anybody not to. No. I ran some Baez concerts right during the FSM thing. And I remember one night when Joan was singing, I think at some candlelight thing, and I went over to, a few nights before our big concert, which was planned at the Greek Theater, and which was already, I think, sold out. And I remember running into Dick Hafner, who was the head of the campus UC Information Service, which was their publicity, you know, public information, and he said, we may have to stop your concert. And I remember, I don't know what I said to him exactly, something like, you know, well, whatever you have to do, Dick, I understand, but I wonder if it might not be a good thing to let a little steam off, to have a concert. I just put a little word in there, and I always felt like that's one of the reasons we had the concert was, you know, I just put that bug in his mind without saying, opposing him. He was a good guy. He was not a crazy radical, right-wing radical, anything like that. But that was politicized, and Joan's concert was politicized. And I've seen some things at her concerts that were political, but the festivals, even with Joan, no, I don't remember any flare-ups.
Do you have any sense of what came across best in terms of audience enjoyment? You know, I'm not trying to mean, you know, old-timey musicians or blues guys or city bluegrass bands like the Greenbrier Boys. Did anything consistently hang in there and really appeal to folks?
I would just say that certain performances, like when the New Los City Ramblers first came out in '59, 60, came out in '60. When they hit that stage, I mean, the place just combusted, and they had just had one of the worst fights of their entire career, and they were known for their fights.
I think I might have been told about this. Was this when John Cohen made Tom Paley take the plane up from down south instead of driving him?
Oh, I'm not sure. Could have been. I don't know.
Okay.
They told me later. Mike told me later. I think that they decided definitely they were quitting. They weren't going to ever perform together again. You know, after that night. But whatever it was, I mean, it worked. and they were just like unbelievable. The energy and the interweaving of stuff, the passion. I think like when any performer had that particular passion of a moment, really got one with the audience, and that was part of my job, was to provide an audience that would inspire that. And that was, I always saw that as what we could do. We couldn't give them money. These guys came for practically nothing. I hate to think of what they got paid, which was, we knew we weren't making money. Usually we were either breaking even or losing money, but no, we had no backing. I was the backing. In other words, the way I was the backing was, if it lost money, I had to come up with the money. And it only happened a few times, and once it happened with enough money that I had to defer the following year, and they went along with that. But anyway, that was a bullshit system. But it was what worked. It wouldn't have happened otherwise, so it happened. But when we provided an audience, got together the people. See, the festival started when the first poster was seen, when the first brochure was seen, when the first word got out. The festival started then. So I busted ass on getting the announcements out in such a way that people would understand what each person, what the greatness was of each of these people, and they'd come thirsting for that, and not looking for stardom or something like that. We didn't have that many stars, so I had to offer them something. And so when the audiences were great, when they were great audiences, then oftentimes the performances would be great too. And so there was no one thing. There wasn't just blues or bluegrass, or we didn't really have any. We never had a real bluegrass thing. Closest was the Greenbriers, who were kind of a hybrid. But you know, sort of old-time country music, singer-songwriters. Probably the greatest response was to Pete.
Yeah.
I think probably Pete had the greatest response. And he had, you know, he politicized the big concerts in to an extent. I think he inspired people to treat people better.
Well, yeah, I would
Tom
think
said, you know.
Pete preaches a humanitarian ethic
Yeah,
as opposed
that's
to
right.
a strictly ideological ethic.
Yeah, right. He didn't.
Yeah.
He wasn't sending them out to
Vote for somebody.
vote for somebody or man the barricade or something. He could have. And I remember Bertrand Bronson, who was the greatest ballad scholar of his time. And he was at Cal. He was an English professor. He said to Charles Seeger, after, I think Charles recounted this to me, after one of these big festival concerts in the Greek Theater, he said, Charles, your son is a dangerous man. And Charles agreed that he could be a very dangerous man, because when if he didn't sort of like calm everybody down at the end, he could send them out to do anything. As Bess Lomax said, Pete is a mystic. Pete is a mystic, not a star or something.
The last festival was in '70, right?
Yeah.
Did it wind down because of personal weariness, or the times, or a combination of the two? Was it the times that caused the festival to terminate then?
It was very simple. It was getting a lot harder to run festivals. In the old days, I would sit down with the campus police, and I'd say, look, we never have any trouble with these things. We need a few officers up at the Greek Theater. They'd say, fine. We think you ought to have 6. I'd say, oh no, I think 4 would do it. We were talking about difference of, maybe the profit margin on this thing,
Yeah.
And I mean, not the profit was what we were after, but we were trying not to lose.
Right.
And so we compromise on 5 officers. Well, now, these days, I mean, they got to the point where they wanted 100 officers there, because who knows what would happen to these crazy folk singers. So it was getting harder and harder to run these things, and also 15 years was a good amount of time to have done it, and so 56 or 70, and so I just decided that was the time to stop. And it was ironic, because right at that time, Manny Greenhill, who was managing not only Joan Baez but also the Ramblers and Doc Watson and a bunch of people at the time, Manny Greenhill had come up for the first time. We worked with Manny. He'd been very helpful to us over the years. Although he always said no first, and then later would say maybe, and then after a while he would say yes. But Manny came up to the festival, and he just loved it. He thought it was just, I don't know if he said the best festival he ever saw or something like that. And just been momentary enthusiasm. But he then said, well, look, he knew I was thinking about stopping, because I was also working in running the Baez concerts, which I continued doing for another couple of years after that stopped. And he said, look, I'll find the money, to guarantee you some money, because I never had a nickel guarantee. I did all this. I worked 6 months of the year with maybe going to lose money as a result, which is pretty stupid of me economically. But anyway, I'm not complaining. It's just the way it was. So Manny said, I'll find some money, so we can guarantee you some money, and we'll back whatever has to be backed. And he wasn't saying he would do it, but him and whoever else he found. And so we being my former wife and I, who'd been at my side through the festivals and had helped immensely with them, decided that we considered that. That was nice to know, but no, it didn't really change the fact that it was time to change. And so I remember calling Manny and telling him, oh shit. And so we just kind of said, okay, that's...
And nobody wanted to take it over and do it?
No, and no one has ever seriously come forward. I mean, I'm not against it. Some guy shows up at my door tomorrow and says, look, I'm crazy like you were, and knowledgeable somewhat, and and I believe the guy is serious, I would be all for it and help in some ways, But nobody is ever. You need one crazy guy or gal,
Right.
one crazy individual who is willing to, to do it.
What did you play through those years? I know you played a lot at the Freight. You played around town.
Oh yeah.
What was your stuff?
I played for years. I played every gig there was, whether it was the Kiwanis Club or it was somebody's birthday party and they heard me sing somewhere, or a street fair.
Solo guitar and voice, is that?
Yeah. So, well, actually, let's just stop also.
No, we got all.
Oh, you got that was mine.
We got 120.
No. Anyway, small concerts and festivals, KPFA. I did. Well, I started singing folk songs, although I didn't start playing guitar until in '47 and '49. I sang around school and some of the local, community events, stuff like that. Little radio work, local stations. And then in '52. I got invited to do some folk song shows on KPFA, which had just been born 2 or 3 years before that. And I developed into doing a weekly 15-minute folk song show on KPFA, which then ended up being broadcast sometimes as many as 3 times a week later on. And I did that for years and years, and then I got into running a show called Midnight Special, which began in, I guess, '56, and I ran it till I don't even know it was 59 or 60, and then another woman took over. A woman who's our engineer took over, and she ran it beyond that from good, so 5 years or 6 years, something like that. And so I sang all kinds of places. I sang with my first wife. We sang together some of the time, but the one thread that ran through the whole thing was me and my guitar. A lot of the majority of it was that.
Did you write or sing traditional songs or other people's
I
songs?
sang traditional songs, and then I started in the '60s singing other people's songs as well. And I wrote some songs. I didn't just switch over to writing all my own songs. Well, mostly self-taught. I did have a few lessons when I was 12 or something like that, and then over the years I would come across some singer I really liked, whose guitar I really liked, and I would study a few, some lessons with them. But mostly I just did it on my own.
Did you come to like Dylan as time went on?
No! As I think I said when I first mentioned it, a year or two after that, I was totally turned around on Dylan. I mean, with the second album, I went, whoa! And I listened to it a lot, and by that time it was. It never worked out to get him in a festival. I wish it really had. But no, I loved Dylan for about 5 albums, and then I've loved the last. Well, I've loved the most recent one now is okay, and the one before that, Been Down to One. No, that's Good As You've Been to Me.
Yeah.
The subtitle for the old Blind Blake song.
Right.
You're Gonna Quit Me, Baby, Good As I've Been to You. That's a great album. But there's a wasteland in there that I never liked very much.
Well, yeah, there's
A lot of people.
everybody.
Most people love Blood on the Tracks. I'm trying to like it. I'm still trying.
I like Blood on the Tracks too.
No, I know. It's most everybody who I respect loves that album.
There's the early stuff, then there's a gap, then there's Blood on the Tracks and Desire. And a lot of people like those. Then there's a real wasteland.
Yeah.
Then there's the recent two. Did you come to like any of the other so-called stars of the '60s revival, Oates, Paxton, and
Well, Paxton I
Jack
loved.
Elliott?
Yes, sir. Now, see, after Pete sang Tom's songs, and Tom came to town, and I got to know him a little bit, and I loved his early stuff. I mean, I really did. And I guess we are mutual interest in professional football that was provided a little bond, because when he got to town the first time I met him, he says, "Do you know anybody who's watching the Patriots tomorrow?" I said, "Me." And so he came over and watched it with me, and so then we got into the next year's festival. So Paxton, yes. Phil Oakes, Phil was in '67 Phil's festival, and he did very well. And I liked Phil, and I liked some of his music. I never found myself humming many of his tunes and then listening to myself.
Were Phil's personal troubles evident then when he came to the festival? I'm wondering. It's many years
No.
before he killed himself. So
No, I realize that. They really weren't. He wasn't. Didn't seem like really at peace with himself like Tom did. But it wasn't like he was a troubled person.
yeah.
No.
3:33, so I don't.
Oh,
wanna keep
really?
you,
Oh, okay. I hadn't even realized.
Beyond your.
Beyond the degree.